Right, so I think we could slowly get started. Welcome everybody to the HBCP webinar series. I think this might be the 7th in the series or something like that, or maybe the 6th. And today's webinar is about tools for using the behavior change intervention ontology. So we will be joined. So I'm Jana Hastings. I have with me already James Thomas, and we will be joined later by Professor Robert West from University College London, who is another contributor to the Human Behavior Change Project. What we're going to do is we have prepared a demonstration. We recorded this earlier, so it's going to be played back. And then we're going to have a live discussion afterwards where we sort of take questions. So please make a note of your questions in the Q&A part of this interface. And we will pick up the questions and answer them during the live Q&A session after the pre-recorded demonstration. And yes, as the slides say, please upvote the questions you want answered. The number of votes will influence the order in which we answer the questions. So just in case we don't get to all the questions that are asked, just to note that all the questions are also noted and shared and will be shared together with answers at a later stage on the Open Science Framework. So no questions are lost. And also there's no stupid questions. Ask anything. We're really looking forward to this discussion. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available afterwards on YouTube. And the slides will be available on the Open Science Framework. And registered attendees will get an email with all these links so they can go and watch it again or show it to people who missed it. So thank you very much. And yes, let us begin. So hello, everybody. I'm really delighted to welcome you to our webinar about tools for using the behavior change intervention ontology. I'm Professor Jana Hastings, and I will be joined today by Ella, Lisa, and James, who I will ask in a minute to introduce themselves. And we will have informal conversation about tools for using the behavior change intervention ontology, supplemented with some demos. So I hope that this will work. And now, Ella, Lisa, and James, would you like to introduce yourselves, please?
Thanks, Jana. So my name's Ella Howes, and I've worked on the Human Behavior Change Project for about 2.5 years and have been involved in the development of a number of ontologies.
My name's Lisa Zhang, and I'm a research assistant on the Human Behavior Change Project and also involved in ontology development.
Great.
Hello, I'm James Thomas. I'm based at the Epicenter, which is another part of UCL, and I'm one of the co-applicants on the project. So I've been on it since it was conceived many years ago.
Excellent.
So Jana, before you and James give us a demo, I thought you could tell us what is an ontology.
So we had a webinar a few weeks ago on this topic, so I will just be very brief and not repeat everything. That if you have more interest, you can watch that webinar. But basically, an ontology is a way of representing the types of thing in a domain that are the subject of research studies in such a way that you can more or less reuse and agree on the definitions of things, arranged in a hierarchical way, so you can refer to things in a more detailed or a more general way depending on your needs, and represented in a computable format, so you can also use the same categories and definitions in your computer systems.
And so briefly, I know there's been other webinars going into more detail, but why are they helpful?
So ontologies help you to achieve many things. They can help you to achieve kind of standard ways of talking about things so that you know and can agree within a community when you're talking about the same thing. And this is helpful because if you always use different language and refer to slightly different entities, you can't put your research together afterwards, because it's all kind of about subtly different things, and you may not even know or be able to figure out what exactly was intended. So they let you have a common language. And then they also help when you use this common language, you can then put together research on a topic. So you can synthesize a whole lot of evidence and put it together and kind of get out some common view of what the state of the research is on a given topic, which is really important because there's a lot of research and it's quite difficult to get a kind of overview. And this is really important work, which takes up a lot of time in our modern research ecosystem. And then you can also use them when you're thinking of designing a new study or designing a new intervention, even outside of a research context, to sort of give you an idea of what are the types of things that other people have done and thought of, just all in one place, right?
Sound very helpful. So it's like they help address kind of issues with quality of reporting of papers and the quantity of evidence. And like you mentioned, they're computer readable.
Absolutely. So you can build them into tools.
Amazing. And so what's one of these ways we can use the ontology related to kind of evidence extraction or surveillance?
So I guess the situation is that evidence is reported in papers, right? That's what evidence is. People do studies, and for the most part, they publish those studies. Okay, it's a whole other story about the studies that they don't publish, but that's not today's topic. And then these studies are sort of in some written form. They're published somewhere, different journals, etc. And the process by which you get back this evidence and put it together and try and gain an overview is a slow process in which you have to go and find the papers. You have to then decide on which parts of the study were relating to which types of thing or so on, sort of understand, figure out a common language to use to put all the studies together for all the different parts of the study. And this process, if you use ontologies for it, you can kind of agree on this classification just once and apply it to a lot of studies, and then be able to share the results in a kind of standardized way so that other people can reuse it and know exactly what you were doing. And I think this is a really exciting potential for the use of ontologies to make a big difference in the future to how evidence is managed and what we can sort of, where we can save some of the unnecessary efforts. But I think that possibly James knows a lot more about this than me and might like to jump in at this point.
Sure. Shall I share my screen and show
Yes.
the system that we've been building? Okay. So one of the strategies that we've adopted in the Human Behaviour Change project, or my part of the project, has been to avoid the sort of like the graveyard of code that you sometimes see on GitHub, with code which was developed as part of a research project, then sort of languishing unused on GitHub, which no doubt did a good job during its project's lifetime, but then doesn't get used afterwards. So what we've done here is we've built the tools that we've used within the Behaviour Change project into an existing platform. So we've been publishing the Epi Reviewer system for systematic reviews for years, actually decades now. And so one of our strategies for sustainability has been to build this into here so that all of the users of this system are able then to take advantage of what's been developed as part of this project. So I'm not going to show you the whole system here, but a little bit of the user interface, just in terms of how we've used the ontology and the concepts within the ontology and the annotation platform to apply that ontology to research articles. So here we've dived into a particular randomized trial on smoking cessation, which has been the focus of a lot of the work on the project. And then on the left-hand side here, we've got the ontology structure, which we'll see in different forms throughout this webinar. So we've got concepts which describe the population, for example. We've got lots of concepts around interventions and behavior change techniques, and all of the detail that those of you who are familiar with this work will be familiar with. And you can see here also we've got checkboxes. So the idea is that where a particular concept applies to a particular study, we can just tick the checkbox. And you can see on this one here, we've got information under mean age, sex, and ethnicity, and all of that kind of thing.
So James, just a question. So if the checkbox is ticked, that means that in the paper, there is that thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So I can have a little look in here under female, presumably we will find under the population, there we go, it's been annotated here. And part of the purpose of the annotations we've had in this project has been to develop a machine learning system. So it's not exactly the same as you might use in a systematic review, but we can see the sort of like the text around that concept has been applied so that when you're looking at this study and you're looking at the study alongside all of the other studies in the review, we can see where we've classified, in this case, the population as being female. We've got modes of delivery as another area of the concepts. And we've got digital here, and I happen to know that one of the ways in which this intervention was delivered was through text messages, so we can see it's been highlighted there. I should say that the advantage of utilizing the ontology in this context within a systematic review framework is that those of you who've done reviews will know that there's quite a lot of work that goes in at the beginning in terms of setting up a classification framework and a way of describing the studies. And if you can adopt a pre-developed ontology, you essentially don't need to do all of that higher level thinking about how the literature and how the domain is organized, because it's already been done. What you're able then to do is to slot the research that you've got within that framework. And that means that other people then can take what you've done and reuse it within that framework, because you're kind of speaking the same language. But also if other people have already annotated research that you're interested in, potentially then you can reuse that. There's always sort of little nuances that you need for particular reviews, but it does give you quite a good step up in terms of the amount of work that you might have to do to describe the research in detail.
Hey, so the ontology also organizes, so it helps us organize the evidence.
Exactly, yeah.
And it helps to save time, essentially. The fact that you can reuse the same sort of agreed on, community shared ontology of annotation types means that you don't necessarily have to do all those annotations again for every review if the same parts of the evidence are covered, if the same studies are included in different reviews, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it also gives you a wider conceptualization of the knowledge. You know, if you're on a review and you're sort of looking at a sort of like a relatively small subset of the knowledge, you don't necessarily know at the beginning how that's going to fit in with the domain in general. And so, you know, sometimes people start with a particular way of framing the research that they find. And as they get into it, they then have to reframe what they're doing. Whereas if you've already had all of that framing and reframing work gone on with a wider group of people sort of feeding into it, that means that you're benefiting not just from the fact you don't have to develop that tool, but you're benefiting from all that thinking that's gone on in terms of how the domain is structured and organized.
So could I see, for example, so if say I'm coding this and have seen that this intervention is being delivered in a digital way, what if I was interested in other interventions that have also been delivered digitally? Can I do that?
Sure, yeah. So I'll come out of this individual study, and I won't talk you through all of the interface here because that would be a webinar on its very own. But for example, we can see here very quickly, we've got 4 studies here which have been classified as having a digital mode of delivery, and we can also then see the text which has been highlighted in the documents across those studies. There's lots and lots of other ways of reporting within the tool here for doing systematic review and evidence synthesis work. But one of the things you can also do is to publish your data from a review for public consumption. And that's one of the things that we think is particularly important. There's a particular growth area from this project is the ability to publish a data set so that it's live and accessible, both in terms of people being able to look at it. So I'll switch over to the visualization part of it here. So we can see that, but also this is sitting on top of an API, and that means that computers can also consume the content here.
So you can share all your hard work.
Exactly.
So what are we looking at the moment? We're looking at a data set which is associated with smoking cessation, which is coming out of this human behavior change project. And what does this interface allow us to do, James?
Well, the interface, again, takes the ontology structure and the concepts within that ontology and has published it for the world to see. And so we can see our modes of delivery, for example, here. We've got different modes of delivery. We can, for example, look at various frequencies. So here we go. We've got different modes of delivery, and we can see how many studies in the data set were face-to-face or distance, printed material, etc. We can click on these, and we can get lists. We can download all of the data into Excel or as RIS if you're interested in RIS. We can click on any one individual record. We can see all the bibliographic information, and we can see all of the detailed annotations which have been applied to this one record. So all of that is public and open data. But we can also query the data in lots of different ways using some of the power that we get from the ontology. So I've set up a visualization in the tool already. So here we've got our modes of delivery as facets here, which are in the legend at the bottom here. And I've basically cross-tabulated the goals and planning behavior change technique against the facility where the intervention happened, essentially. And then we've got the modes of delivery as the colored circles here. So I can hover over these. I can see that there were 7 records which were in a residential facility using problem solving and used some kind of distance learning or distance intervention. I can see that there are 5 records that use the somatic mode of delivery, for example. And then I can click on them and I can download the data in the way that I have for other records too.
So this is really, really interesting. So what we're looking at here is kind of different ways of looking at how much evidence there is with a given ontology annotation and other ontology annotations, right? So it's a way of saying, this is where we have evidence and this is where we don't have so much evidence, right?
Exactly, yeah. So that's why we've got the gap here in brackets. It's an evidence and the gap map. It shows you where we do have evidence and what the evidence looks like. We can then go and look at it, but it also shows us, for example, rehabilitation facilities. We have no evidence on goal setting. That seems to be either a research gap or a gap in the evidence base that we've assembled.
And so that really helps us, see what's been done before and what hasn't. So it can help address the issue, I guess, of people doing the same thing, or kind of evidence all, being in the same area.
Yeah, sometimes you want to replicate research, but it's a good idea that if you're going to replicate, that you know that you are replicating rather than doing it by accident.
So looking at the legend at the bottom, James, so there's a mode of delivery. And so I understand the ontology helps us to organize that evidence, but how if I was coding, so say with somatic, if I don't know what that means, where can I find the definition for that? Maybe that's a question for Jana, actually.
I'll hand back to Jana then.
Yeah, so I think this is, again, so until now we've sort of looked at the categories that are available in the tool and how they're used for annotation, but one of the really big powers of ontologies is that these things are all defined, they're given clear definitions so you can reuse them. So I'm just going to share my screen and we can look at another tool which helps you to see what the definitions are of entities. So this tool is called BCIO Search, and it allows you to search the ontology and find specific things and then look at their definitions. So we're going to have a little live demonstration of my inability to type. So there we find a somatic mode of delivery, which is one of the entities in the ontology. And if we click through, we get to this page. Now, I just want to make a few observations before we look at the definition of what the somatic mode of delivery actually is. And the first observation is that every term in the ontology has a unique identifier. And this identifier is for the computers so that you can keep track of which are the same things. And it allows you to get to this entity, even if you haven't used the whole label, if the whole label is not convenient, if you just called it somatic, for example. And then that inside the ontology, you have a kind of classification hierarchy. So each entity has parents and children. This is a metaphor for classification systems, parents and children. Parents are higher up in the classification hierarchy, children are lower down. And you can see that somatic is not just one thing, but lots of things. And so the definition is given here on the page, so you can see how you would code that by understanding this definition. It's a mode of delivery of an intervention that involves devices or substances that alter bodily processes or bodily structure, right? So this is what somatic means. So that is, of course, then a very broad range, and you would expect that there would be different specializations of modes of delivery. And here you do see, for example, ingestion is a somatic mode of delivery, chewable substance, physical stimulus like light exposure. So me getting a suntan in order to improve my mood levels because of the vitamin D and stuff, this would be a somatic mode of delivery through light exposure, for example. So this search tool allows you to search for entities, to explore, to kind of browse around and look at how they're related to each other. And very importantly, to get the definition and any other information associated with them, such as in this case, the fact that somatic is completely separate from information. And these are intended to mean different things. That's what disjoint means, sharing no members.
So that's really interesting, seeing the granularity of this mode of delivery. So we've been talking a lot about the studies that have already been done in the past. So I was just wondering, is there any way of how these tools can be helpful for designing future studies and future interventions?
That's right. So we've talked a lot about evidence and about use of the ontology for annotating evidence, but you might not be doing a study yet, you might be sort of planning a study, and it may be at that point it's also useful to look at the ontology. And there are several reasons why it's good to look at the ontology when you're planning a study. For example, you might want to get an overview of what the different types of different aspects of the intervention are that other people have used, and seeing it all in one place might sort of prompt you to think about the design of your intervention. Oh, maybe I could use this, maybe I could use that. And the tools help you to get that overview of the ontology. So here you see many children, and this is a good way, and it's a clickable way. You can go and click through here and see the definitions and so on. But this is nevertheless kind of this interface is tightly linked to the specific entity that you're on the page of, and looking at the definition and so on for all of these entities. And we actually have another tool which lets you visualize the ontology as a whole. And I think this might be, when you're planning an intervention, this might also be a really exciting way to look at sort of what are all the different. So what do you think? Shall I show that? Shall I show that tool now?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So this visualization tool, which is called the Ontology Visualization Tool, it at the moment we have a selection of different ontologies, and these are coming from the Behavioral and Social Sciences Ontology Foundry, which is another part of the project that we have sort of grown out in order to have a community and a home, not only for the behavior change intervention ontology, which is the one we're talking about today, but also for other ontologies in the behavioral and social sciences to be able to use the same tools and to work together and collaborate by sharing and agreeing on the same standards. So here we select the BCIO, and we want to visualize the behavior change intervention and its mode of delivery. So we want to get an idea of sort of what are all the different entities that we might want to think of when we're planning our new intervention. So I'm just going to add mode of delivery so we can look at the all the different types of mode of delivery. So here it's got a sort of search that's keeping up with when I'm typing, and then we submit it to get a visualization. Right, so here in our visualization, this is, I'll just see if I can make this slightly bigger. At the root, you have the sort of most, let's see. Well, smaller always works first time and bigger takes ages, right? That's one of the rules of demonstration effect. So you have here behavior change intervention, which is the sort of core entity at the upper level. And what you see here with these yellow arrows are different types of relationship other than hierarchy, which connect up with different parts of the ontology. So you can see with this visualization, different parts of the behavior change intervention, aside from just one specific part that you know already that you want to look for. And this is really useful for getting an overview and interacting in this kind of high level way. So you can see delivery, content, and that you have as part of your content, you have behavior change techniques. As part of your delivery, you have mode of delivery, but also style of delivery, right? And schedule of delivery. These are all different aspects of the intervention, each of which has a whole branch of its own, but we're looking here particularly at the mode of delivery. And here I'm just going to zoom out a little bit again so that you have more of an overview, that you can here see all the different children plus their branches laid out in the same visualization. And so we think this is a really helpful way to sort of get an overview of a big portion of the ontology at the same time. It's never easy to visualize complex data structures like this, but having different ways to look at it and then sort of interact with it may be helpful taken together. And to have this overview and then come back and look in this tool at the definitions and the specific parents and children of each individual term.
That's been really helpful. So I guess just to wrap up, is all of this available to the public? So can researchers and practitioners alike use these tools for their work now? And if so, where can they access them?
Absolutely. So everything that we've demonstrated today already exists and is live. However, we are still working on the final launch of the website and associated front-end sort of package. And this launch will be on, Ella, help me.
6th of June.
6th of June, 6th of June. So all the tools will be completely with all their links and URLs and guides will be launched to the public for use on that day. Really looking forward, very exciting. So today was just a preview, and you can watch this space for the final release.
Yes. Well, thanks so much, James and Jana.
Thank you, Ella and Lisa. This was a really interesting discussion. So we look forward to questions. Right. So thank you. I see there are already some questions getting quite some lively votes in the question box. Keep them coming. That's fantastic. So James, nice to see you. And let's get going. So the first question with the most votes is from an anonymous attendee. And it says, I'm planning to buy Susan Mickey's Behavior Change Wheel textbook, but I'm wondering if ontologies are covered in it and if the textbook is being updated anytime soon. It was first published almost 10 years ago. and there have been many advances since then. So can you share any recommended reading around this for us, for those of us who want to take a deeper dive? Oh, this is tremendously exciting because actually, I think the exact right person to answer this question has just joined the call. So Robert, could I ask you to take a second to introduce yourself very briefly, and then I might have a question for you.
Hi, yes, Robert West, one of the people helping with the Human Behavior Change Project based at UCL, and one of my contributions to it was being a sort of domain expert on smoking, and the other was having a great interest in how we can apply AI and AI tools.
Great. So Robert, we've just presented tools for using the ontology to structure the evidence and for browsing the ontology. And we've got some questions. And the first question was from somebody who writes that they're planning to buy the book, the Behavior Change Wheel textbook, and they wondered if ontologies are covered in it and also if the textbook is planned to be updated anytime soon. I wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Yes, I do have thoughts on it. At the moment, well, in the current edition, ontologies are not covered. It has the sort of the proto-ontology, as it were, of the Susan's taxonomy of behavior change techniques, but it was written before we'd sort of got into all this. But of course, now things have moved on quite a bit since that first edition, and we're in the middle of writing the second edition, which I have to confess, the reason it's not out is because of me, because I was supposed to have finished a draft, and I'd promised a draft before the end of last year. But actually, in a way, I think it was fortuitous, not fortuitous, it was just good that we didn't, because actually it's really at the beginning of this year that we've made so much more headway on the development of the ontologies, including the behavior change technique ontology. So the next edition will be very ontologized, and I'm hoping that we will get it out by the end of the year.
Very exciting, Robert, very exciting. I really look forward to that. I would like to add that we're also working on a textbook specifically dedicated to ontologies, but unfortunately, I can't promise when that will be delivered. Let's just say it's work in progress, and will be out at some point, hopefully within a year, but not necessarily this year. So that was great. That was an excellent question. I think maybe we'll pick up the next question now. So this is by Katrina Messiah, who asks, building an ontology for research appears key for summarizing and giving structure to evidence. I see how this works for top-down interventions, but can we use these tools for inclusive research, e.g. co-creation, that could be more bottom-up, and where there is more pluralism in knowledge? If so, how would you recommend that? This is an interesting question. I don't know, Robert and James, if who wants to go first here? Right.
Since we're not in the same room, I'm looking at James, but he doesn't know I'm looking at him.
It's hard to, yes. So I'll just nominate. Robert, you go first, and James, if you have any supplementary thoughts, you can come in after that. Is that all right?
Yes, I think this is absolutely crucial. I don't think you can build ontologies just from the top down, because they're just too big a job. And one of the things we really, really want to do is to crowdsource, if you like, the work for ontologists. But what that needs is a certain amount of training in order to get people sort of up to speed with how you do it. And that's one of the things we're doing in the Human Behavior Change Project, is we're developing some training materials to help people to contribute to the ontologies. And I think it's the case, and I certainly hope it's the case, that the way we've built these ontologies is sufficiently inclusive and flexible, that if you've got a particular theoretical orientation, it's fine. You know, different theoretical orientations can coexist within ontologies. Ontologies exist, you know, for those bits for which there's a consensus. And you know, if you think that a particular variant of a construct is something that you work with and is really important, that can be incorporated with the ontology, even if someone else has got one which is a bit different or even very different. They can coexist. That's part of, you know, the whole purpose of ontologies is interoperability. So I think that hopefully that the training will be successful and people will sort of increasingly actually they are coming on board. And I just mentioned one thing about co-production, which is that Susan and I were on a trip to Australia earlier in the year, and there's some people working there specifically on co-production, and we've decided that we're going to add some co-production entities into the ontology precisely because of exactly what you say, which is all these different views about what it is. But of course that's not really the thing. It's not what it is, it's what there are these entities, these classes that people are interested in for which that label is applied, and they can coexist.
Really, really interesting. Thanks, Robert. James, do you have any thoughts about sort of bottom-up co-creation as it applies to the evidence and sort of structuring the evidence?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's always difficult to develop these things in the abstract and not have a specific or at least a general use scenario in mind. And so I think that does mean that if we're looking for one ontology to rule them all, then we're unlikely to find it. We'll just end up creating yet another ontology, which is not always a bad thing. Sometimes we need another one. So I think that I always think that we need the use case in mind and agreed across whichever groups are contributing to it. I think the other thing that this is getting at is the degree to which you sort of see this as a standardizing framework, which then stifles creativity and innovation, and the degree to which it helps people to, when they're talking about the same thing, to use the same language so that people know that one another are talking about the same thing. And that is a sort of a tension which you see raised fairly frequently when people are talking about ontologies. But I think, Jana, you're probably the one who's encountered that the most out of the three of us.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you say. There's a tension between sort of aiming to standardize in a rigid way, or just supporting the process which is taking place anyway to be a little bit less muddled where possible, right? And I see us sort of in the second box supporting clarity and communication in a shared language wherever that's possible. But if people are inventing new things, then by all means do so. But of course, if you are inventing a new thing, it helps to know that it's really new and not just a reformulation of something that already is there, right? Great, excellent. I think we'll move on to the next question now. So James, I think I'm going to ask you to lead answering this one. So the question from Emma Begley is, does a platform like this negate the need to search traditional literature platforms, e.g. Embase and PubMed, when conducting a review?
It's a very good question. I think the answer is we don't necessarily know quite yet. We are seeing a move, I think, towards increasing availability of bibliographic research information. That doesn't mean that everything is open access now, but the team at Microsoft, I think, when they put together Microsoft Academic, that galvanized quite a large group of people to start thinking in terms of more open and more comprehensive data sets of this kind. Obviously, Google's probably got the biggest in its Scholar database, but it's not open. We can't play with that. The Microsoft version was open. It was the result of a web crawl. And when they closed it at the end of 2021, I think, or 2020, the team at Our Research called OpenAlex picked up the baton, as it were, and they are now publishing the OpenAlex data set, which is about 250 million records now. And that's completely open access under a Creative Commons license. And the work that we've done looking at it, and the work, what we did was look at the comprehensiveness of that data set in comparison with A, the COVID-19 evidence surveillance that we were doing, and then also B, the Cochrane Tobacco Addiction Group trials register. And what we found was that if you're looking for journal literature, then it'll be in that data set. And we moved our evidence surveillance from the traditional sources of Embase, PubMed to using OpenAlex, because actually we found that back in the day, that was Microsoft Academic, it was actually more comprehensive than looking at those data sources. So potentially, yes, depending on what you're looking for. It doesn't, for example, have trials registry data in it, but then we know where the trials registry data are. They're in the trials registry. So we can look at, for example, OpenAlex, and we could add searches on trials registries. And the other fairly closed set of data at the moment are dissertations from which are not actually yet present in institutional repositories. So, and also journals which went out of print before they were digitized and went online. So those are the main categories that we found weren't there. The other type of literature which isn't there are some of the conference abstracts that you get from the sort of extended data set within Embase. Which are useful to find. It's hard to see how a conference abstract's got enough about a study to include in a review, but it's a clue that at least a study happened, and then you can go digging and contacting authors and things. So I'd like to just say, yeah, we can just search and use the open Creative Commons licensed sources. And I hope that we will be able to do that, but it's not quite as simple as that yet. We did do a cost effectiveness analysis. I can dig out the URL for that, so you can look at that paper if you want.
While James is digging, Robert, did you have any additional thoughts on this question?
I think we will move away from PubMed and so on, and I think we kind of have to. I mean, they're fantastic. I mean, you know, they've just been so good compared with what we had before. There's no question about it. But now with the sort of technology that James is deploying, I think we could do so much better. And I'll just give you a quick anecdote as to how important that is. Next week, I've got to give a talk on digital interventions to aid smoking cessation. And you'd think, well, how hard can that be to to find out about what's the latest evidence? Turns out it's flipping hard, because what are digital interventions? What's included in the reviews? What search terms do you use to get at things like websites? Do you include things like text messaging? And you've got quite a few different reviews that all have different inclusion criteria, that all give you different answers. And that's not the level of granularity you need. That's the wrong question. It's not even a question, how effective a digital intervention is. That's like saying, how interesting are books? So, and so in order to answer the questions you really need to answer, you need the level of granularity of the kind that, James's system is providing, and more, in the long term. So the scope, we can do it. It just requires the resources to be put into that, and then we can start to answer the real questions, like with this kind of context, with these kind of people, what with this kind of digital interventions, what's the kind of effects that we can expect to see?
Yeah, absolutely.
I can see that Emma's asked another question, which she says we've answered, but I don't think we completely did, that related to that, which was how reliable can you be in terms of capturing the most relevant literature? And I think that's worth highlighting, because OpenAlex is a fantastic data set, but it's put out there, without the systematic review, for example, use case in mind. And so if you're wanting to run the types of structured Boolean searches that systematic reviewers love to run, then it doesn't support that unless you have the data set yourself and then implement it yourself. And so I think in some respects, we need to change the way in which we're finding the research, if indeed we can use these large comprehensive repositories of open access data. We know we're not searching multiple different sources using Boolean searches, but we might need to use machine learning and other natural language processing techniques to find the relevant literature within these large repositories. So yeah, I think that's actually quite important to think, okay, so we've got 250 million records, hooray, we've got just about everything that we'd ever want in there. But the challenge then comes with how on earth do we actually separate out the signal from the noise?
That's right. That's right. So I think this is a really, really interesting discussion. But I would like to move on to the next question now so that we keep working through them. There's a lot of questions. Thank you. Very nice audience. So our next question is from Leslie Lewis, who asks, will you be holding any workshops in terms of how to use it most effectively? I always find it more useful learning by doing than watching, even a video step-through guide. So I think this is absolutely key. And perhaps, Robert, you could say a word or two about the plans in this direction.
Yes, so we do have plans to develop training materials, which will be on a revamped HPC website. And the way they're going to work is, and do come to us with suggestions for things, because we're building the training program, and we will carry on doing, building these modules as long as we can. Essentially, the idea is that they will be YouTube videos. They will be on a YouTube channel, HBCP channel, which we'll create. And they will be presented together with, if you've used YouTube for anything, you'll see that there's a description below. And in that description, you can put links to things. So in that description, there will be links to resources and self-test quizzes. So yes, that's the plan. And they will be very much about sort of hands-on. They will be kind of like, they're not, they're not live. They will be online, sort of recorded training. Whether we would have the resources at some point to do live training, I think that's the sort of thing that we would, one would have to get funding for, because obviously the funding for the HBCP is coming to an end. If we're fortunate enough to get funding for the next, for HBCP 2, which we will know later in the year, then certainly that will become a very important part of it as well. So yes, we're definitely planning on doing that, and do come to us with ideas and suggestions for things that you think would be really helpful.
James, is there additionally sort of training material for the EPI part, which is already in existence, or something?
Yeah,
like that?
there are. There's different bits and there's different tools there. There's YouTube videos and that kind of thing on the website. So yeah. Great,
thank you. Okay, our next question is sort of refers back to a question that we discussed earlier. This question is from Dr. Jean Davis, who asks, are ontologies included in Hager et al.'s book, The Handbook of Behavior Change, Cambridge Handbooks in Psychology? So I don't know this book. I wonder, Robert, do you know it? Or
I do. I don't think they are. I think that Martin, I'm just trying to think who's been contributing to that book, but I don't think ontologies are in there. But why don't you write to Martin and say for the next edition that you ought to? I think he might have actually invited Susan or me or others to do a chapter, but we were unable to. But I think it's definitely the future. So I'm sure that Martin would be up for doing it in the next edition.
Excellent. Always nice when you can give work to other people, isn't it? So much more fun than having extra work to do oneself. Excellent. So the next question is by Karen Porter, who asks, Is there a movement to get authors to submit a checklist based on a suitable ontology alongside their draft paper sent to publishers? Surely would be more comprehensive if the authors highlighted relevant attributes at the outset. Could be easy to ramp up to high degrees of compliance if publishers required a completed checklist, and this would also pick up variations needed in ontologies if the author chose other for any option and explained a facet of their study that wasn't covered. This is a really, really good idea, which Robert might be able to tell you about some work that he's already been doing going in this direction.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on this one. As sort of along those lines, and in fact, I think we have a webinar coming up in this series on the paper authoring tool, which is an online tool which does precisely that and more, because it will take stuff that you fill in and actually create text for you in some key areas like your research questions and your stats analysis and so on. So the idea behind it, very much was to get around this issue, or to overcome the issue that's still, huge, despite the guidance that's available, of incomplete and poorly described studies. It's only at the moment limited to randomized trials and feasibility trials in its full form. But if you just wanted, for example, to use it to describe your intervention, you could just do that. You just go to the intervention wizard that's in it and describe the intervention like that, and it will prompt you for all the bits and pieces, and it'll prompt you for ontology IDs, which then get stored in a JSON file, a computer readable form, which you could then include with your as a supplementary file for your paper. This is the future. I'm sure of it. And when you've got to imagine the future where no one ever needs to do a hand search or hand annotation of a paper anymore, because it's all there in a JSON, in a huge JSON data store or triple store, and open access, open source, so anyone can get access to it. It just completely revolutionized everything we do. So we're not there yet, and tools like the paper authoring tool are just the beginning and the foothills of this. But I completely agree also that we need to work with journal editors, with funders, with the gatekeepers, to make this kind of thing, to facilitate this kind of thing. And as ex-editor-in-chief of the Journal Addiction, I'm working with the Journal Addiction to incentivize authors to use tools of this sort by, for example, and I'm just throwing this out as a kite to fly because I haven't got agreement to it yet, but I'm hoping to. It would be, for example, that if you use a tool like this, then you will be guaranteed that at least that your paper will be reviewed. And nowadays, that's quite a big deal, because journals like Addiction will triage out about 70% of the papers just simply because of the volume that they have to deal with. And you may even have things like having reduced payments for things. I think there's lots of options, but yeah, really good question.
Yeah, this is really, really interesting. I mean, we're trying to bring about the future, but it seems like as academics, we only have a certain influence, and then there are these big players, this sort of publishers, who at the end of the day are doing their own thing with their own objectives. James, do you have any comments you want to add about sort of publishing as a whole, or your experience with other publishers or other journals?
I think we've pretty much covered it. I think that it does seem crazy, our whole publishing framework, that we spend billions of pounds, dollars on research, and then hardly anything in terms of making sure that we can find it once it's finished and that we can reuse it. You wouldn't start from here if you were trying to organize a research discovery system, would you?
Very good, thank you. So I think we have time for just one last question. So I'm going to take one more from an anonymous attendee who asks, just to check I'm understanding this correctly, if we used an ontology to help organize evidence in a systematic review, Does that mean we can share how we have coded papers and that work is not lost so we can build on others' coding? So I think this question is trying to get at the idea of how do we sort of use the ontology to make systematic reviewing more compositional than it currently is. James, do you want to take that one up first? And
yeah, I mean, I can talk in terms of the reuse opportunities. Yeah, the idea would be that this saves you time and effort in terms of organizing the framework that you're going to use for doing your data extraction and a review. And you're benefiting from lots and lots of people's input in terms of how the field could be organized conceptually. So it's a real help in that in those terms. Also, if we're collecting data and if we're also published in more standardized and machine readable and reusable ways, then we can reuse the data that other people have put into reviews, and we can make our own data available for other people to use. There's I'm going to talk a little bit more about this next week when we're thinking about some of the tools. Thanks. But the use of the identifiers that Jana showed just briefly in the ontology, if we can do simple things such as make sure that we're using consistently the same concepts and you taking them from vocabularies and associating with those identifiers, because then even if machine the software doesn't talk directly to another piece of software, if we've got something that's using the same identifiers, then we can write something that says, okay, so we know what concept we're talking about here, so we'll write an imports facility to reuse that data.
Really, really powerful stuff. Robert, do you have any last comment to add?
No, I think that's it. I mean, can you imagine, when you've got lots of people doing systematic reviews that are sort of, overlapping, if when someone coded something up and annotated, someone else didn't have to do it again.
Imagine. This would be a really wonderful future world, and it's a world which we are very invested in trying to bring about. So thank you, James, Robert. This was a very interesting and enjoyable discussion. Thank you to the audience for the great questions and comments. So if, unfortunately, we didn't get to everybody's questions, we will, as I mentioned in the beginning, be following those up on the Open Science Framework. And if you have any further comments or questions, you can use the link that's showing up on the screen at the moment. Our next webinar will be James telling us some more about what he just hinted at today about finding and extracting the evidence. And I think this is really another very exciting aspect of the work that we are looking forward to diving into more detail next week about. Just to save the date, we did mention 6th of June, there will be a comprehensive launch of the knowledge system and all associated tools that we mentioned today, as well as a revamped and updated website. So please come along and join us for that session. And that's it for today. Here are some links where you can get more information. Thank you all for participating, and I look forward to seeing you next time.